Okay, so I was just live, and then my husband came in and had to get a cord. So I don't know if this is going to be going out to the proper channel or not because we had it all set up and then I couldn't go back on again. And it's interesting because this live is about boundaries. And he came in anyway. We're trying to get our daughter to school or to camp. So I don't know if this is going to work because it's not on the proper link, but I'm going to go ahead and go anyway and talk about. We come on here live every Tuesday morning, and we have a different topic. We're working on. We are new to YouTube, so if you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe. So we're talking about boundaries today, and on the Spiritual Warrior channel, we talk a lot about um, ways to be a badass in your life, ways to feel joyful, ways to feel courageous, ways to feel like you're living your full truth and living the characteristics of what it means to be a spiritual warrior. And one of those is boundaries. Now, I'm going to talk about boundaries are interesting because yes, we need them. We've got to have them to live in this world. And as a recovering people pleaser, I've definitely had wobbly boundaries. And one of the reason I had wobbly boundaries is because I was afraid that if I had a boundary, people wouldn't like me or people would leave me or I was scared to use my voice. There was a lot of story behind why I didn't have strong boundaries. And one thing I'll say is I've seen people do two things. I've seen people have very loose boundaries. Well, actually, three things: very clear boundaries, very healthy boundaries, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then I've seen people have almost extreme boundaries. I've been around someone lately that their boundaries were beyond extreme. It's like I don't know, their boundaries must have been taken advantage of in the past. So they were very adamant about their boundaries and talked a lot about their boundaries. And this was a person that I had a professional relationship with to the point where it took away from their generosity because they were so extreme in their boundaries. And to the point where it's like, I don't get like, there hasn't been a boundary crossed, but yet you're talking about boundaries kind of thing. So there's like these three ways, right? Like the loose boundaries, the healthy boundaries, and then the extreme boundaries. And the on both sides of the spectrum, it's usually from pain or wounding, or someone has, you know, crossed the boundary with them, or they've just not learned to say no. And then the healthy boundaries is you can always tell when you're around someone who has healthy boundaries. They're very clear in their communication. They say yes when they mean yes. They say no when they mean no. They don't do things out of people pleasing. They stand up for themselves. If someone pushes back on them, they stand up for themselves. They don't allow that to happen. Now, this has been my experience as a former people pleaser. I'm going to say that because I do kind of people please sometimes, and I'm still working on it. I can be very, very, very patient for a very long time, and almost to the point of too patient. And then someone can cross and cross and cross, and this is not something I'm proud of, but then all of a sudden they've crossed one time too far, and I set a boundary. And when I set a boundary and I haven't set a boundary all along, people don't like it. They don't like it. It's like, "Oh my gosh, wait, I have been getting away with treating you this way or doing these things or not showing up, and you didn't seem to care before, but all of a sudden you care." And that always ends up being not a great situation, and a lot of cleanup has to happen because I wasn't in my voice setting a boundary in the beginning, and they were just like doing their own thing, like following my lead, like, oh, I can get away with a lot of stuff because she hasn't said anything. And then when something is said, there's breakdown because the dynamic has shifted. They're being called out, and I'm calling something out, and there's a boundary being set. Instead of, the ideal thing is to set a boundary at the beginning. And you can set boundaries, and a boundary just means like, what that means is, what is it that you are really okay with? What are you okay with people saying to you, doing with you, What are your boundaries at work? How do you allow people to treat you? How do you show up in your life? Do you have good boundaries with other people, or do you, um, steam past them and keep pushing, pushing, pushing? I had a recent situation, well, it was a few months ago, where I kept saying, "No, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. No, I can't. That won't work for me." And the other person just would not let up. Like, they just kept going. They just kept going. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? What about, like, trying to re-enroll me? And sometimes that's fine, right? Like, they're like, "Okay, well, let's talk about it. Is it possible we could do this?" But when there's a clear no and you keep going, that's breaking someone's boundary. That's breaking someone's no. And sometimes and on the other end of receiving the boundary, we don't like it. Like, we don't want people to say no to us. I don't, especially if I have an attachment to something, then I don't like the no. But the boundaries keep us, if we have aligned, beautiful boundaries with kindness and heart and truth, then everything seems to work out very, very well. It's when we get wounded by someone else's boundary, or when we push someone else's boundary, or we allow someone else to push us, or we are motivating from low self esteem or something like that, then things get sloppy, things get messy, and things can get really unclear. Unclear. And then before I end, we'll talk about, like, what I mentioned before, this extreme boundary where someone sets these extreme boundaries out of fear that you're going to take advantage of them. And that's also coming from past wounding. That's also coming from something happened, right? Like, I have an extreme boundary, and I'm gonna like shut down, or I'm gonna tell you again and again and again, and there's no flexibility or no wiggle room. So it's like, what side of the spectrum are you on? And really beginning to think about, like, where are you with your boundaries? Are you clear on your no? Are you clear on your yes? Do you let people walk all over you, or do you walk all over other people? And some people are acting, it goes both ways. It goes both ways. And it's a hard topic. I find it to be a really challenging topic. And because, especially sometimes with friendships, if there's not or relationships of any kind, if there's not clear communication or clear, authentic connection, things can go sideways because people end up having expectations, and then the expectations get mixed in with the boundaries. Expectations always kill connection, because you're in an expectation. It happens with spirit. I tell people this when we're learning how to journey and connect with spirit guides. If you have an expectation of what the guides are going to show up and do for you, you're going to kill your connection to them. And if you have an expectation of another human being, you're going to kill the connection. It's going to, because there's going to be all of this, like, whatever it is that you've made up in your head has to happen. So when we release all that and we just live in our hearts and live in our truth, and we're kind to other people, we're loving, and we're loving to ourselves. What are we okay with? Am I okay doing this? Maybe. Yeah, I think I can get on board with that. And I'm going to say yes. Or am I saying yes because I'm afraid you're not going to like me and I really don't want to do it? So I'm going to allow this whole wobbly boundary to happen. So it's a big topic. So just beginning to, like, look at, where are you with your boundaries? Where do you overstep people, or do you, and even the person I was talking about who had, like, really strong boundaries, she was not good with other people's boundaries. She was, like, very much a bully, like, push, 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 but you come to her and it's like, you're crossing a boundary. So it's really fascinating to watch. And when you start to go into, like, curiosity and not judgment, you start to notice the games that people are in, and everything people are doing. Most of the things are coming from some sort of past wounding. And if we can begin to look at people as whole, as God, as love, and still maintain that boundary, things will work really clearly. I mean, and this is the last thing I say, because this is probably a whole other live, the government and people in power, they're pushing our boundaries all the time. The whole vaccine thing was a boundary pushing agenda. So many people's boundaries in their no got pushed or they got made to do something. Many people had to take it because they were going to lose their job. They weren't going to be able to feed their kids. That is an extreme example of a boundary being pushed by authority. And that happens too all the time too in schools and in places like that, or in hospitals, and people are scared and sick, and a doctor says something and they say no, but the boundary's being pushed and it's being done in birth and all those kinds of things. And that's probably a whole other life. So we have it happening on a macro level. So on a micro level, really understanding what your relationship is to your own boundaries and how you want to show up in the world with that and how you want to treat other people. And when people say no, it's not personal. It's just that they're honoring themselves most of the time. All right. My name is Beth Osmer, and I hope this worked because I went on a completely different link because my husband came in the first one. I was like, what are you doing? So I had to end it. All right. Talk to you soon. Okay. Bye.